The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Yo, Philly, how you's doing? Welcome to Philadelphia Baseball, past, present, and personal. I'm Bill Kashatus, your host on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Today's podcast will focus on Philly superstar Dick Allen, who played for the Phils in 1964 to 1969 and again in 1975 to 1976. Allen was the 1964 National League Rookie of the Year, the 1972 American League Most Valuable Player when he was with the Chicago White Sox, a two-time American League home run champ, and a seven-time All-Star. For most of his 15-year career, he was a consistent 300 hitter who averaged 20 home runs or more a season. His lifetime totals include a .292 batting average, 351 home runs, 1,119 RBIs, and an OPS Plus rating of 156, which ranks him 20th of all time. Yet Allen still does not have a bronze plaque in the National Baseball Hall of Fame at Cooperstown, New York. For the last several years, Dick's family, friends, and fans have been campaigning for his election to the Hall of Fame. His next opportunity will come in December 2020 when the Golden Days Veterans Committee votes on his candidacy. More recently, Dick was inducted into Ted Williams Hitters Hall of Fame, which should provide some momentum for his election to Cooperstown as that December 2020 election nears. With us to discuss Dick and his storied career is Hollywood film producer Mike Tollin, whose film credits include Radio, Varsity Blues, Summer Catch, and Dreamer. Mike is also a lifelong Phillies fan, a close friend of Dick's, and along with Mark Carfagno, the most active member of the Dick Allen Hall of Fame campaign. Welcome to the podcast, Mike.
Thanks, Bill. The only quibble is why can't I be called Havertown film producer instead of Hollywood film producer? Come on. I think, I lived in each about the same number of years, I guess, by this point.
Philadelphia has much more of a cachet, so
yeah,
sounds better.
Man, we're the champs. We're the city of champions right now, aren't we?
That's right, absolutely. Well, look, let's start with the Hall of Fame issue. Flat out, in your estimation, is Dick Allen a Hall of Famer?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm listening to your recitation of his stats, and on a cumulative basis, objectively, as hard as that is to be objective, because you know my affection and longtime closeness with Dick Allen, 351 homers doesn't measure up for a power hitter. But we all know the extenuating circumstances. And the great news is that through the prism of modern-day analytics, which are sophisticated and are largely now relied on for evaluative process, both scouting future prospects and trading current players and evaluating on a historical basis those that have come before and retired, there's no doubt, as you pointed out, OPS Plus, if there is a catch-all statistic that is, largely accepted, that's the one. And he, to be 20th all-time, essentially there was a 10-year period where it was Mays, Aaron, and Allen were the three best hitters, and certainly in the National League, if not the whole game. And the hard part about what Dick's going through now, it's a little hard to explain to your listeners, but 3 years ago, he came within one vote of being inducted. It was the Veterans Committee had a 16-person voting body. You needed 12 votes to get in. He got 11. You can't get much closer than that. So we all thought 3 years later he's going to be a shoo-in. Well, because of the number of people who are eligible and are getting consideration, the Hall of Fame chose to divide, I think, the golden era, right, Bill?
Right.
They divided it into two categories, and as luck would have it, they split it right down the middle in Dick's career. So he played from 64, as you pointed out, when he won the Rookie of the Year, through 77 when he finished out his career with the Oakland A's. Those 14 years, and they put the dividing line right at 1970, and it was really a toss-up about which era he would be considered a part of and where he would be eligible for induction. And they chose to put him in the earlier period, 64 to 70. You could argue both ways, but I think the judgment was he made his biggest impact with the Phillies. He came in, immediately made a splash as the Rookie of the Year, immediately took the team to, well, who could forget, a 6.5-game lead with 12 to play. That's kind of how he's identified. We all think he'd go into the Hall of Fame wearing a Phillies uniform, although he did win an MVP and 2 homer titles in Chicago. So the problem with him being placed in that era is that the next voting for those guys isn't until 2020. So we essentially had 6 years between opportunities. Dick's in his mid-70s, and he's getting up in years, and I think we'd all love him to be there and be in good shape and be able to celebrate the coronation of sorts. So we're kind of pressing the fast forward button and like just trying to get to 2020. You mentioned the Ted Williams Hitters Hall of Fame. I went down to Clearwater for that. It was a great night. Beautiful. It's a winter night, but it felt like a summer night in Clearwater. Dick and Tony Perez were inducted. Charlie Manuel got a special induction and made a beautiful speech. Phillies fans and team personnel and ex-players everywhere. Steve Carlton was there as well, signing autographs. And that was a feather in his cap, for sure. It's a pretty heady bunch that he joins in the Williams Hall of Fame. I think that come 2020, there's going to be a groundswell. I think a lot of people are looking at his stats, looking at the era he played in, looking at the impact he made, looking at the respect he has from his peers, not to mention the incredible devotion he has from his fans. I mean, this is a guy, everybody our age, Bill, you and I are just a few years apart, but everybody who was old enough to see him play at Connie Mack Stadium has their own memories of the balls flying over the roof and flying out of there at speed and distance that no one had seen before. So
I want to get to that, Mike, but before we move on, some of our listeners might not fully understand, the history behind that Hall of Fame. You did a really good job of talking about his Veterans Committee candidacy. But Dick was on the writer's ballot for 15 years, and he never got more than 18.9% of the vote. Now, those are the people who pay attention to the analytics. What I'm concerned about is that the Veterans Committee members generally don't. And as you said, those analytics are just making his numbers look better and better and better. So, my one concern about 2020 is that if there's, any question, it could easily be decided through the analytics, and the veterans just don't understand them. So I do have a concern about that.
I think, look, it's been said before that you need the advocate in the room.
Right.
I wasn't there, and so this is just third hand, but, people said Billy Williams got Ron Santo in his last year eligibility. And, there are people out there, ex-teammates of Dick's, people who watched him play, people who played alongside him, or people who played against him. I'm hoping there's a champion, at least one in that room. And I think you have to factor in all that he, put up with. I mean, Dick Allen was sent to Little Rock in 1963 to integrate not just a team, but an entire league, right? I mean, wasn't he the first player in the Southern League, first black player in the Southern League?
Arkansas Travelers.
He was faced with picketers when he got off the plane in Little Rock. Orville Faubus, who, led the protest at Central High in the 50s, was there, and he'd get rocks thrown through his windows and his tires deflated every day. And, what he put up with on his way to the majors, stunning. And then it wasn't easy in Philly in those days. Let's face it, it was a relatively polarized city. The Phillies were one of the last teams to integrate. There were a lot of Latino players with him, but he was the first really big African American star for the Phillies. And, he just kept doing his thing. And, I don't know if you want to get into the Frank Thomas episode, but that was certainly a turning point in his career in '65.
Yeah. No, what I want to do is talk a little bit about your boyhood. You grew up in Havertown in the '60s, right? As a diehard Phillies fan.
Yeah.
And you saw him play at Connie Mack Stadium. What initially attracted you to Dick Allen, then known as Richie Allen?
There was a demeanor, a carriage, a presence. When he strode to the plate, everything else stopped. First of all, he had a war club. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it, but depending on who you ask, it was 40 or 41 ounces. Nobody, I think, in modern times ever swung a bat that heavy, and he made it look like a toothpick. And the way he walked, Dick Allen was a spectacular athlete, and some say he could have gone pro as a basketball player coming out of Wampum High in western Pennsylvania. Broad shoulders, thin waist, elegance, confidence, swagger, the way he'd pull up his sleeves over his shoulders. Look, this is pre-TiVo, right? There's no time shifting. So, Mom calls you to dinner, and you go, hang on, Mom. Hang on, Mom. Not even if he's not just if he's at bat or in the on-deck circle. He's coming up third in this inning, Mom. I'll be in a few minutes. You had to watch every at bat because every time there was a threat that it would go farther than any ball you'd ever seen. And it was electric. It was magnetic. It was charismatic. And we fought in my family. My older brother was a Johnny Callison fan. My dad tried to keep the peace. And, of course, my most vivid memory was sitting down at Jaime's Deli, which is still there in Ballard Kinwood, on a Thursday night. And my dad said, I got a little surprise for you kids. This is late September. And he pulls out 4 World Series tickets.
Oh, wow.
World Series. There's only 2 weeks left. We got a 6.5-game lead. And then it began. So pre-TiVo, pre-high def, pre a lot of things, right? I'm putting my transistor radio under my pillow every night with the earplug. Good night, Mom. And I tune in by Sam and Bill Campbell and Richie Ashburn and basically cried myself to sleep every night for 2 weeks. We lost, starts with Chico Ruiz. For those who don't remember the lore, the game against Cincinnati, Chico Ruiz steals home in the 6th inning. That's the only run of the game. We lose 1-0. That's the first of 10 consecutive losses, and our 6.5-game lead becomes a 2-game deficit going into the finale. And we got to win both ends of it. You finish the story, Bill. You know how it goes.
Well, yeah, basically we end the season in second place. St. Louis goes on and plays in the series against the New York Yankees, and it was just miserable. I mean, it was the first time I ever saw my father cry, which was, a real shock. But, yeah, I mean, that is the beginning of really if something bad can happen, it will attitude, the Murphy's Law of Philadelphia sports. And that's why whenever we win a championship, it seems to come out of nowhere, and there's no expectation that we're going to even come close. As with the Eagles.
I raised 2 kids in Los Angeles as Phillies fans, proud of it. My son was 9 when I brought him back to the 2008 World Series. I'm like, you have no idea how lucky you are. It took me till I was 25 till I got to go to a World Series. But and I'd always say it builds character, and you appreciate it that much more. I mean, look, the Eagles experience teaches us that. I mean, when you're 0 for life, essentially, and I got an 18-year-old son now. My dad passed away more than a decade ago, but I felt like he was on my other shoulder. We went to Franklin Field every week and watched them lose game after game. And like I say, I span the eras from Joe must go to Chip must go, right? And now we don't want anybody to go. We want everybody to stay. But back to the Phillies, they were always my team, and he was always my guy. And I don't know if kids today have heroes like that. larger than life. You don't know all the details of their personal lives. All you know is what you see and what you feel, coming through mostly black and white TVs back then. So visceral. I mean, I still feel it. And I very, very lucky as a filmmaker, as a storyteller. I got to meet Dick in the 70s. We talked about doing a book. That didn't happen. And so I turned my attention to doing a film, and now we're making a documentary. Talk about a slow burn. I mean, we've been making this, quote, making it for over a decade. I shoot at different opportunities. I've been to Wampum. I've been to the racetrack with him near his home in Florida. I've been back and forth to Philadelphia. We've spent some really emotional times together. When his daughter was killed and when my dad died, we found each other. Pretty deep connection. I put him in 2 of my movies. Dreamer.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that. In 2001, you invited Dick to make a cameo appearance in Summer Catch, and that film starred Freddie Prinze Jr. As a hard luck pitcher in the Cape Cod League, and Jessica Biel as the love interest who gets Freddie to believe in himself. Dick played the role of a bird dog who was scouting Freddie's career. And then a few years later, you invited Dick to do another cameo in your film Dreamer about an injured racehorse who's trying to make a comeback. And that film starred Kurt Russell, Elizabeth Shue, Chris Christopherson, and a very young Dakota Fanning. How did Dick Allen, the actor, come off? And how did he interact and relate with that kind of star power on the screen?
Well, it's funny. On Summer Catch, I was producer, director, king, chief, bottle washer, could sort of make my own calls. It was a small enough role. Nobody was going to quibble. And he had John McGinley, a great character actor, as another kind of a rival scout. But they were, compadres. Actually, I think in the credits, it says Dick Allen, his character is the man in the black hat. And John had done some research and had been down in the Myrtle Beach minor league team, and he was kind of learning the jargon. And man, he was so excited to play with a perennial all-star, play a role with a perennial all-star like that. And I had a little surprise for them, which I didn't tell him. But because I had done a film with Hank Aaron, we had started a foundation together and gotten close. And I asked him to come down and do me a favor, and I didn't tell them. And so there's a scene where they're just sitting there with their radar guns and they're watching Freddie Prinze throw, and in walks Hank Aaron.
Wow.
Playing a scout, and you see John McGinley do a double take like, what? Well, I'll be.
Wow.
Dick was very cool. I said, just be yourself. This is all baseball. He didn't have a lot of lines. He was hanging out, but in between takes, he had these kids who were the stunt doubles, minor league baseball players, rounding out the teams in the Cape Cod League. And I helped introduce him to them because he's innately very shy. Let them know who this was and his achievements. And he once he's, it's warmed up and he's talking a language he knows, which is baseball, man, he can go all night. And so, I'd have to pull him away from these kids and say, there's another take, Dick. Come on, let's go. We're working here. On Dreamer, that's his other love, horses. Famously, Dick Allen once said in regard to AstroTurf, if a horse can't eat it, I don't want to play on it. He's a lover of horses. He's owned horses. He's trained horses. He's certainly placed a bet or two in his day on horses. And so when I invited him down to Keeneland, which is a racetrack in Lexington, which would be kind of like the Fenway Park or the Lambeau Field of thoroughbred racing, I said, come on down, we're going to pay your way, we're going to give you day player wages, and we're just going to hang around the track. It was like, oh boy, hit the jackpot. And in this case, the John McGinley sidekick role was played by Kurt Russell, who was Dakota Fanning's dad, who was trying to nurse this, as you said, broken down horse back to running shape. And Dick was the expert. Kurt wasn't really a horse guy, and so now Dick was talking to him, kind of teaching him language and the horse racing parlance and how to make judgments about, horses' condition. And he's, his role was the guy behind Kurt in the betting line. He makes a comment about Kurt betting on an 80-1 shot. But Kurt Russell played some minor league baseball. Was originally Ron Shelton's choice for the role in Bull Durham. The studio didn't think he was a big enough name at the time and ended up saying, "We want Kevin Costner," which is how that thing ended up and how that career got started. But Kurt played minor league ball, knows the game, was a little skeptical, to be honest, about Dick Allen. Had heard all those rumors we always hear about his clubhouse presence. And I just said, you know what, I'm going to let him see for himself. And by the end of that day, oh, man, were they fast friends.
I believe
Kurt
it.
said, it teaches you not to believe rumors and hearsay. Gave me a big hug and thanked me and said, I'll never forget that. That was a real treat to spend the day with Dick Allen.
Yeah, that sounds really neat. I mean, Dick is really good when he's placed in a mentoring role, and to get that inside view about Russell and how he wasn't really that knowledgeable about horses, and
right.
Yet, he was a minor league baseball player is really cool. They must have played off each other well.
Yeah, those are.
Mike, you've spent an awful lot of time with Dick, as you mentioned, and you probably know him better than anybody else except Mark Carfagno and maybe his family members. Maybe you know him better than some of his family members at this point because you're working on a documentary about him, and you've been back to his hometown, which means so much to him. How would you describe Dick as a person today?
Pretty much the opposite pretty much the opposite of how Philadelphia sports writers of the 60s describe Dick Allen. I talk about the three-headed monster of Bill Conlon, Stan Hochman, and Larry Merchant. Bill, we all know what happened to Bill. Stan was a great guy who became a dear friend and became a real supporter of Dick Allen in his latter years. And Larry Merchant went on to an illustrious career, mostly as a boxing commentator. But they just pummeled him, and they turned him into something he wasn't, and they created the illusion of a surly, angry, arrogant, closed-up ball player who was nothing even remotely like that. This is a God-fearing mama's boy from a small town in Pennsylvania who loved playing ball and loved sitting around a clubhouse, maybe having a cigarette, maybe drinking a beer and talking baseball for as long as anybody else was willing to listen and participate. And in his mid-70s, he's the same guy. I mean, at the Ted Williams Hitters Hall of Fame, it was like a high school reunion, seeing Dick relive old times with not only Tony Perez, but George Foster and Willie Horton and Andre Dawson and on, laughing, carrying on, telling the same damn stories they've obviously told to each other a dozen times, like we all do at reunions. He is a good family man. I know his son, Richard II, really well. Great kid. Met his wife this last trip. I've met his grandchildren. I know how he worshipped his mom. I know his values. I know how decent and respectful and empathetic he is. And I know how important getting into the Hall of Fame would be for him. He won't admit it. He's bashful about it. He doesn't want to acknowledge. But it would be truly life-changing, and I can't think of anything I root for more for a friend of mine than that.
Mike, thank you for all that you've done for the campaign. I know Dick appreciates it. All of us who are working on the campaign appreciate your efforts. We can't wait for that documentary to come out. And good luck with that. And thanks for joining me this evening.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for all you do, and we'll stay in touch. We'll do it again certainly as we get closer to the vote. Next time we're going to get there.
Absolutely. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in to another podcast of Philadelphia Baseball, Past, Present, and Personal. I'm Bill Kashatus, rounding third and heading home on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network.